Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the BPM Change Management PRR Review Monthly Meeting. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating today's web conference. In an effort to increase transparency and provide greater service to stakeholders, the ISO records the BPM Change Management meetings. The recordings are for informational and convenience purposes only, allowing stakeholders to listen to meetings that they may have missed. The recordings will be publicly available on the BPM Change Management webpage for 30 days. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the proposed revision requests for PRRs that are in the initial or recommendation stage of the process. Today we'll be discussing 6 PRRs, 3 are in the initial stage and 3 are in the recommendation stage. 5 have been ISO submitted and 1 was submitted by Southern California Edison. We will be taking questions throughout the call today, and you can enter the question queue at any time by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. I'd just like to remind everyone to please introduce yourself before asking your question. The BPM change management process is part of the California ISO's larger stakeholder initiative process, and the purpose of BPMs is to set forth business practices that implement the ISO tariff. The ISO conducts a yearly policy initiative roadmap process to consider and rank initiatives. Policy changes submitted through the PRR process will be referred to the policy initiative roadmap process. Each subject area in a BPM is based on enabling language in the ISO tariff, and the PRR process cannot be used to introduce changes that are not supported by existing tariff authority. So today we'll start off with the Generator Interconnection and Deliverability Allocation Procedures BPM. We have 1 PRR in this BPM 1259, detailed descriptions of network upgrades. It's in the initial stage, and Songji Zhu is here to take us through this one.
Good morning. This is Songji Zhu. This PRR is to implement the area and the local network upgrades associated with the revised deliverability assessment methodologies. So this PRR, the change in this PRR mainly includes 2 parts. One is to update the previous area deliverability constraint criteria, and the second is to add a new area off-tier constraint criteria. So all the changes we made in this PRR are based on the approved tariff language itself or material that has been filed to FERC to support the approved tariff. Where appropriate, we added some implementation details for stakeholder transparency. So far, we have received initial comments from San Diego Electric, SDG&E, as well as LSA and SEIA. So San Diego's comments are editorial, and we accept all those edits. LSA and SEIA's comments are about whether those appropriate change in the BPM, and also we have specific questions. We have posted a response to the PRR, and also I'll address their comments and questions while I talk through the next several slides. Initial comment period expired, and the next step is to post recommendation. Okay, so the first part of the main change in this PRR is to update the previous area deliverability constraint criteria. So there are 4 criteria, C1 through C4. Those serve as general guidelines, how ISO identify area constraint versus local deliverability constraint. So if one of the criteria is met, then it is area constraint, otherwise it's a local constraint. So there's no change to C1, remains the same. Also no change to C2, but we added explanation how we count 20 generating units and what contributing means in the context of deliverability assessment. Most of the changes are for C3 and C4. So in C3, we changed the mitigation cost threshold from 100 million to 50 million. C4 is a new criteria. I'll explain the rationale for those C3, C4 later. First, I want to explain why we removed the previous C4. So the previous C4 is really a special case of C3. So C3 says contributing megawatt greater than the portfolio megawatt and mitigation cost more than 15 million, more than the threshold. C4 is not in the renewable zone and the mitigation cost more than the threshold. So if it's not in the renewable zone, then you can put base portfolio megawatt equal to 0. So C3 actually covers C4. So we removed previous C4 and we replace it with the new C4. The reason here, so if in the initial filing with the FERC on the GATAP tariff, the generation interconnection, the delivery allocation procedure tariff, we explained how ISO is going to identify area constraint versus the local constraint. So basically, the first criteria, of course, is for area constraint, the contributing megawatt behind the function should be more than the portfolio. So that's why this contributing megawatt more than this portfolio is in all three, C2, C3, and C4. Then the filing explains first, it is based on the definition of area constraint, area delivery network upgrade. It impacts a substantial number of generating units. So that's how we implement it here in BPM. 20 generating units is considered a substantial number of generators. Then we explain that the next factor to be considered is mitigation cost. If mitigation is expensive, then it's area. Previously, we used $100 million as the threshold for threshold. Now we change to $50 million. So $50 million actually is the threshold used in transmission planning process as the boundary between management approval or board approval for the transmission upgrade. So aligned with that threshold, upgrade that costs more than $50 million is expensive and should be analyzed thoroughly through the transmission planning process. That's why we lowered the threshold to $50 million in C3. Then, based on C2, C3, it's a threshold, but in reality, the situation is not always such a clean cut. So, for example, a mitigation that costs $49 million that affects 19 generating units. It's hard to say it's a local, it's still an area. So to deal with this, we defined on the other side, 10 generating units is considered non-substantial, and $20 million mitigation is considered inexpensive. The in between 10 and 20 generating units, that's marginally substantial, and between $20 million and $50 million, that is marginally expensive. So in between, we will look at both factors. We combine C2 and C3 for the situation that we have marginally expensive and marginally substantive constraints. That is the reason for C4, more than 10 generation units and more than the mitigation cost more than 20. And in order to limit this C4 to actual area kind of impact at least a small region than just one or two interconnecting points, we add electrical characteristic. That is, this constraint is caused by BES contingency. So this electrical characteristic is added to ensure that it takes the impact from the bulk system and it's an area instead of local pocket issue. So for the off-peak constraint criteria, this is new. This is after the first approved off-peak network upgrade provisions. We added criteria. The first criteria kind of mirror the criteria for the deliverability constraint. So C1 mirrors the ADC C1. So if the constraint already identified as ADC, then it will be considered a OPC as well. Then the second criteria is the 20 generation units. Here the difference is for off-peak deliverability assessment, only locational constraints resource interconnection generator contribute to the problem. Other generators, they can be used to mitigate area. They can be used to mitigate any off-peak constraint. so they don't contribute. So the wording here is slightly different from the previous one. Is that more than 20 locational constraints result interconnecting generators. Now, C3 mirrors the ADC C3, so contributing megawatt greater than the portfolio and mitigation cost more than 50 million. So C4 doesn't mirror the area deliverability criteria. The reason is the difference between on-peak deliverability and off-peak delivery is on-peak is for system reliability, but off-peak is really to provide a tool to manage excessive renewable curtailment. So it's more of an economic issue here than a reliability issue. And through the stakeholder process and also through the filing to FERC, based on the direction from FERC, we need to provide information and make the cost of the mitigation as well as the awarded curtailment as a major factor of determining area off-peak constraint versus local off-peak constraint. So the implementation of this C4 is it is a little bit more complicated. So I will use an example to walk you through how we determine the cost of mitigation exceeds estimated awarded curtailment cost. So if the mitigation costs more than the curtailment cost it could avoid, then it is the area. In other words, looking from the other side, for a local constraint, the mitigation should be less than the awarded curtailment cost. So here is an example. So if we have 100 megawatts solar PV behind the constraint, and we want to determine whether this constraint is local or area. So we have to figure out two parts. One is the cost of mitigation, that is relatively easy. Then the other part is the estimated awarded curtailment cost. This is not that straightforward because what we are doing here in the deliverability assessment is a snapshot power flow study. And from just one snapshot power flow to estimate a curtailment cost, it needs a lot of other information, and we need some approximation. So the steps we propose in the BPM is to make sure we do not overestimate the curtailment. We cannot represent all the system conditions to accurately estimate the curtailment. So the steps are designed to try to avoid overestimate of that cost. So to calculate that curtailment cost, first we need to know what's the level of curtailment. So we perform study to figure out deliverable megawatt without upgrade. So in this example, let's say 17 megawatt is deliverable without any upgrade. Then we figure out the deliverable megawatt with upgrade. So we can conduct reconductor some line and make the entire 100 megawatt deliverable. So the difference between 170, that is 13 megawatt, is considered incremental deliverable megawatt. So that's one snapshot power flow. So that's step 3. So this is between 17 megawatt output and 100 megawatt output. Using the solar output profile, we can figure out how much energy that will be. But consider that this is just one snapshot. It doesn't mean for any hour that has the output between 70 and 100 megawatts, we will have this incremental deliverable energy benefit from the mitigation, because under different system conditions, there could be oversupply issue. So it doesn't really matter if there's a transmission constraint. The renewable will be curtailed, and the transmission upgrade would not provide any benefit. So for that purpose, we limit the incremental deliverable annual energy to the hours when capital load is about 50%. So when of the peak, 50% of the peak load. So if the total system load is below 50% of the peak, under our, the solar output conditions, there's definitely an oversupply issue, and we will not count those hours as a benefit from the transmission upgrade. So that's step 4. So between 70 megawatt, 100 megawatt, and also the ISO load is about 50% of the peak load, give us like 19 gigawatt hours for a year. So there's then we need to further look at this 19 gigawatts. Not all those 19 gigawatts can be saved via transmission. So we don't know. So it depends on the system topology, where this local pocket or this gen pocket versus the rest of the system. How the load also change inside the pocket. There could be a lot of variation. So if the load increases, then actually the export from the pocket will be lower, then the benefit will be lower. So for that reason, we need a discount factor to account for those different hours with different system conditions. We select the BPM indicates it will be between 0.5 to 0.75, depending on how much load and gen are inside the pocket. If it's a load pocket, then it will be lower. The benefit will be lower. If it's a gen pocket, the benefit tends to be higher. So in this example, we take the high end, so 0.75 as a discount factor. So 19 gigawatt multiplied by 0.75 is at roughly 68 gigawatt hour. So that's step 5. Next slide. Okay, so now we have the total energy thing per year. Then we translate that into a dollar amount. So we use, in this example, we use CPUC 2019-2020 IRP report that shows solar PV energy cost is $30 per megawatt hour. So multiplied by the annual energy saving, that gives us about $2 million. So this is the potential avoided procurement cost from the transmission upgrade, to mitigate this constraint. Then on the other hand, let's look at the cost of the upgrade. So let's assume, not yet. So that's is to convert that to avoided procurement cost. This is just based on annual cost. Then we need to change that to a net present value for comparison purpose. So assume 40 years of transmission line lifetime and 7% discount rate, and we can translate that to 1 year energy curtailment cost of about $2 million to over 40 years. Then the net present value is $27 million. Then step 8 is to look at the cost of the mitigation. So let's say the capital cost of the upgrade is $20 million. Then we use the NPV factor for the revenue requirement, and we get to the net present value of the revenue requirement would be $26 million. So we compare the cost, $26 million, and the benefit, $27 million. So the benefit is more than the cost. And so in this example, this is not area constraint. It will be a local constraint. And overall, it benefits the ratepayer if we assign this capital cost of $2 million, the capital cost of $20 million upgrade to the generators. And there's a high confidence that this benefits the ratepayer, so we can directly assign the local off-peak upgrades to the generators through the generation interconnection process instead of going through the thorough TPP analysis. So here you can see in her hand, so this is if the capital cost of upgrade is a little bit higher, let's say $25 million, then it will pass the C4. So that's the cost is higher than the benefit. It will be area. So just think about this example. 100 megawatt solar probably will only have a few generators behind that. So it won't meet the number of substantial generating units criteria at all for this area constraint, but it will be an area constraint. The reason for that is really the intention of local local off-peak upgrades should be the upgrades that could benefit the ratepayers. So the number of generating units is not a primary concern here. Even with very few generators behind the constraint, if it doesn't benefit the ratepayers, it's not a local, it should not be assigned as a local, it will be area. So that's the rationale behind this. There's a question why it doesn't look at the number of generating units. But it intends to cover more situations than just defined by the number of generators or just simply by the cost of the mitigation. It is more stringent the test in the sense of identifying local constraints. And that's all my presentation.
Thanks, Anji. Are there any questions in the queue for PRR 1259? Again, you can enter the queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad.
We do have a question in the queue. Caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, this is Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I have to say, we have, and I think you could tell from the tone of the comments, we have some very serious concerns about numerous, and actually with the details you have in here, I have more concerns. But going back to sort of the fundamental things, lowering the threshold from 100 million to 50 million or 20 million, the fact that that's where management can approve an upgrade does not seem to be, first of all, we have not seen the response that you posted. And normally once you submit a comment, somebody gives you a heads up that there's a response. So I apologize, we have not seen it, and we will of course, go through that, and it may or may not address some of the concerns. But based on what we know from the presentation, which we appreciate, lowering the thresholds, cutting them in half or by 80%, so that it would seem, based on simply that that's management's authority, there's seems to be some serious policy issues here, that this will result in many more upgrades being, and just looking at the area delivery one, I haven't even gotten to the off-peak yet, but that this will result in many more upgrades being classified as area upgrades instead of local ones, and that those will, therefore, the area deliverability constraints will not be mitigated, or things that would have been classified before as local, which would be mitigated, those will not be mitigated anymore, and you will have basically more congestion and more issues. And, the issues with as you know, we've been very concerned through the whole deliverability assessment process that not enough upgrades will be funded and you will end up with congestion. And cutting the threshold by such significant amounts, in the absence of any details on perhaps, what impacts that would have, we just don't feel like there's sufficient justification offered for this significant change. It is not based on any tariff language, and it is not based on the FERC filing. So that's sort of the first concern we have here, the major concern. The second, going through this whole cost effectiveness thing, it seems like this approach confuses, for the off-peak deliverability constraints, this approach confuses cost effectiveness with area versus local. And it seems like you could have local constraints or local, mitigation for local constraints that would or wouldn't be cost effective, and you could have mitigation for area constraints that would or wouldn't be cost effective. And simply putting a threshold between local and area based on dollars by itself does not seem to be sort of consistent with the definition of local and area constraints generally. So there's several issues here. The selection of the discount rate isn't really justified. There's a 7% discount rate. I forgot what you called it here. When you multiply by 0.75, where does that come from? How is that determined? How the NPV factor the revenue requirement. Again, this is a very detailed methodology that it seems inappropriate to put this in without having some kind of discussion among stakeholders as to, the dollar threshold, as we said, and also this methodology and the concept of cost effectiveness here generally. So we still have some real serious problems. I will have, also have comments on, the different elements of the calculation that you put out here. And so generally, it still feels, this does not feel like a simple tariff clarification that should be done through a BPM. That there, you can have it be a mini stakeholder process or something, but this is all so much more serious than something you would normally, in particular the dollar threshold, so much more serious than something you would do, and it really feels like a policy decision and not a simple interpretation of the tariff. So sorry for running on like that, but we're very, very concerned.
Yeah, so we did provide some response to those questions in the written reply. So for the first question, lowering the threshold, specifically, we do consider everything. We don't believe what you said. We don't agree with what you said on the consequence. You have to look at it in the framework of GATE and the TPP together, and with the deliverability methodology change itself. All those things together, then you will see that not the situation you would describe. So first, the TPP, due to the methodology change, the available TPD to the generators already increased. So the generators are not facing more stringent TPD allocation. Instead, it is easier comparing to before to receive a TPD allocation. Also, you have to look, think about the scape generation. You say there's more congestion. That is based on every single megawatt in the queue will be developed. But actually, to reflect what will be developed, a portfolio is a better reference. And we have a TPP process to ensure the deliverability of the entire portfolio, and also TPP has other reliability upgrades and economic upgrades. So that's why, we lower the threshold. We will let TPP to make the prudent selection of those upgrades greater than 50 million. Just like they have to be approved by board, and here they should be going through the TPP process instead of just putting into the SIP. And the past experience has shown that if we have the upgrade more than 50 million, it's a huge burden on the generators as a local delivery upgrade. It will disadvantage them a lot in the procurement process. So through putting them into the area bucket will make them, will benefit the generators, also will make the TPD in the allocation process to select more competitive generators. But overall, It's aligned with all the principles we discussed through the stakeholder process for the budget assessment revision.
Right, but if you are lowering the dollar threshold, okay, then and first of all, there's not been any indication that the current threshold, that there is some problem with it. And so the idea of cutting that in half or cutting it by 80%, we're afraid that because there would be so many more upgrades classified as area upgrades, they will not be mitigated during the interconnection process because nobody will fund them as Option A projects, and therefore there will be less deliverability to hand out. So yes, understanding the deliverability assessment methodology goes the other way, but that the benefits of that will be reduced if you are simply going to lower the threshold and classify a whole bunch of upgrades as area upgrades that won't be mitigated, and you will have less than you expected benefit from the new deliverability methodology if you're simply getting cut off, half of the upgrades. I'm just taking that number out of the air, obviously, but half of the upgrades that would otherwise have been mitigated in the interconnection process, and now you're not going to, it's going to limit the amount of TP deliverability you have to allocate. So we haven't seen any calculation or showing of the impact of this on, for example, what would the last TPD allocation look like if you imposed this kind of a threshold? How would there have been less to allocate, or is it not much of an impact? We don't know, and that's part of the problem. So it may be that there isn't much impact, but maybe that it's cutting these dollar amounts by so much, it seems like there could be a large impact, and we really have no other information on this. It's not just a tariff interpretation. It seems like a very large policy change that with no analysis in terms of impact.
bottom line, the TPD available is based on the portfolio. It's not based on what's in the queue. So the portfolio has the same criteria apply to both TPP and GATE. So in the TPP, we're going to have enough TPD for all the generators predicted by the portfolio. So there is no adverse impact. We will have enough for every generator that is predicted to be developed at the end.
Well, often there is not enough, so I'm not sure I understand that statement. Often, sometimes there is not enough in an area, and projects don't get awards.
We have TPP process to make sure that, and all the tests so far, we have been performing studies every year. There is enough.
Then why is it that sometimes generators don't get awards when they're otherwise qualified to get them?
So those won't change by this $50 million. So that's the methodology itself. It's in certain areas because the queue is overpopulated. It's much more than the portfolio. And what we need is the portfolio amount. We have enough for the portfolio. We are not going to select generators in the area with expensive area upgrades. Overall, we have enough megawatt to meet our goal. And we want to select that megawatt from a right location. If it's an area constraint, that's not the right location. For the area, we have certain amount. The amount is less than the queue, but the amount is bigger than the portfolio. So generators in the wrong location, they don't get TPD allocation because the generation in the queue in that area exceeds what's in the portfolio and what is expected. The portfolio considers the transmission upgrade cost and try to make it the megawatt develop in the right location at the lowest cost of repairs.
Okay, so are you saying that lowering these thresholds by this amount will not lower the amount of TPD available in any area?
Overall, the system, actually, even in each area, it doesn't lower the TPD available. So that's true, because really this threshold, we have done study that even lower the threshold, we don't see any problem for the portfolio delivery. If there are some problem in the future, it will be mitigated in the TPP process.
Okay, so you're saying there is no impact, and I guess I'm not understanding that, and I will go look at your response, and perhaps it does explain that a bit more. But there is no impact. If you have more upgrades identified as area upgrades, okay, then what? Okay, so let me ask you that question. If you have more upgrades identified, and maybe a lot more upgrades identified as area upgrades as opposed to local upgrades, what is the impact of that?
So if the impact to a particular generator, if it's in the wrong location, it will lower its chance to get TPD allocation. But if you look at from the system level, from what the entire state needs for renewable and for reliability purpose, there is no impact. And actually, it helps that overall process to select the lowest cost generators we build.
Okay. Is this explained and I don't want to waste your time and everyone else who's on the call here. Is this explained in the response? Because I'm not understanding it verbally here, but that could be me. Is this explained in the response that you've posted? If it is, I will just go ahead and look at that and we'll submit comments on that basis. But it does not seem obvious to us that this will have no impact on generators to do this. I'm not sure why you go through the exercise if it doesn't, and I don't see how lowering the threshold between area and local upgrades can't have an impact. So we'll go take a look at what you've posted, but that explanation so far, again, I apologize if I'm being dense, but the explanation so far isn't really resonating. So we'll go take a look at what's posted, and because I know we have a lot of other things to talk about today, and maybe submit some, and submit more comments if it's not really clear. So is this addressed further in the comments or the responses posted?
Yeah, I think it is in the response. You can take a look and
okay.
Just clear now. We can
Okay, not convinced yet, but we'll go through that and submit more comments if necessary on that. So thank you for trying. And are these slides are posted, because I think this is the first time we've seen this detailed example and that kind of thing. Are these all posted?
Yes, these slides are posted to the BPM Change Management
Okay,
page.
thank you very much. I'll relinquish my position here. So thank you.
Are there any other questions in the queue?
There are no questions in the queue.
Okay. Thank you, Sangji. Okay. Now we'll move on to the Market Operations BPM. We have two PRRs, both in the initial stage, 1258 and 1257. And Jamal Bataji is on the line to walk us through these.
Thank you. I'll start with PRR 1258 for the Market Operations BPM. In this update, the penalty price for the incremental and total flow constraints for the energy imbalance market will be revised. And the reason for that is to align with the EIM entitlement rate of change constraints. And this effective date was on June the 17th. No comment submitted, and the initial comment period expired on July 14. And the next step is to post recommendation for this PRR. Is there any questions on this one?
Are there any other questions in the queue?
Okay, I'll move on to the next PRR. Is PRR 1257. Again, this is for the Market Ops BPM. This update is due to the Commitment Cost Enhancement Initiative. We are providing a definition for the run of river resources and also list the registration process in this update. Effective date on this one was July the 1st, and we did not receive comment on this PRR. Initial comment period expired on July 14, and the next step is also to post recommendation. Is there any question on this PRR?
Okay, thanks, Jamal.
Thank you.
Moving on to the Generator Management BPM, we have one PRR in the recommendation stage. It's PRR 1256, and Jason Foster is on the line to walk us through this one.
Hi, thank you, Isabel. So this is for PRR 1256. It's the implementation of FERC order on the deliverability transfers. On May 19th, 2020, FERC issued an order that became effective March 3rd, 2020, which accepted the CAISO's deliverability enhancements associated with the CPUC's changes in calculating the qualifying capacity for RA and additional changes the CAISO made to transmission planning methodology due to the time shift of peak hours. This change results in the CAISO calculating off-peak deliverability status for interconnection requests and determining if delivery network upgrades are required for a project. The change to the Generator Management BPM provides customer with information and steps and timing needed to transfer deliverability. The recommendation and comment period expired July 14th, and there was no comments submitted. And the next step is to post the final decision. Were there any questions on this PRR?
As a reminder, you can enter the question queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad.
There are no questions at this time.
Okay, thanks.
All right,
thanks, Jason.
Thank you very much.
For the Reliability Requirements BPM, we have one PRR in the recommendation stage, PRR 1255, and Melanie Bogan is on the line to walk us through this one.
So for PRR 1255, I just added the available assessment hours for 2021. There were no comments submitted, and the comment period expired July 14th. The next step is to post. Are there any questions?
There are no questions at this time.
Great, thank you, Melanie. And lastly, for the outage management BPM, we have one PRR in the recommendation stage, 1254, and Kalyani Abyankar is on the line to walk us through this one.
Hi, everyone. So this PRR was submitted by SCE, and in our previous phone call last month, I had mentioned that we would be rejecting this. However, after having discussions with folks at SCE and reviewing their comments, we have not rejected. However, we are still working on drafting a formal response on this PRR, and we should be posting it soon. The recommendation comment period expired on July 14th. We received recommendation comments from PG&E and SCE, and our next step would be to post the final decision.
Are there any questions on this PRR?
There are no questions at this time.
Okay. Thanks, Kalyani. So our next BPM PRR review monthly meeting will be August 25th at 11 a.m. And if you have any questions on any of the PRRs that were discussed during today's meeting or any questions related to the BPM change management process, you can reach out to me. My number is on the slide. You can also send an email to the bpm_cm@kaiso.com email address, and we will get back to you. So before I conclude the meeting, are there any last questions?
As a reminder, attendees, please unmute your device and press #2 to enter the question queue. There are no questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then that concludes today's BPM monthly meeting. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.